Serifos, which is in the Cyclades, and they moved it to Thasos, one of the northern islands. But if I'm not mistaken, they're starting up the one in Serifos again. So the current one that was in Thasos was kind of like an offshoot of the first original one. And I believe the both will be up and running. But I correct me if I could be mistaken, but that's the impression I got from their communications.
Did you say Samos?
Thasos, Thassos.
Oh, right. Yeah, I was kind of blown away because Samos is one of my favorite places in the world, and nobody knows about it. It's like one of the Greek islands that the only people who are on the plane are the people going home.
I could, I think, just live in Greece on a Greek island in some fantasy world, of course,
I think that's
I do love the Aegean and just the lifestyle there is very healthy. I think the foods and the water and the climate. Of course, I haven't been there in the winter, so it's good. Yeah. I've missed all the storms.
I was there once in, I guess it must have been March, and there was a really great storm, and that was on Samos actually, and it's really wonderful when they burn, when they trim the olive trees, these centuries old olive trees, they cut off branches that big around, right, to keep them from cracking and falling. Yes. And so that's the firewood, right, is all this olive wood. And so when it's cold, there's all this olive wood smoke coming out of the chimneys of the cottages, and it adds this other layer to your sensory experience. It's just wonderful.
It's such a wonderful place, and like rereading Ovid after I went back, I'm like, oh, I just so understand how this land, this geographic spot in the world, could just give birth to such lush, vivid imagery and works. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Greece and its islands. I think studying poetry and writing poetry there, combined with just swimming and just the life there, is just it's hard to beat that. Unless you're in the Pacific Northwest, of course. I think that the natural foliage here is just wonderful.
It is. It really is. We'll have to. Are you up for a little Q&A afterwards, and maybe we can talk more about place?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and jump in and get started. I'll be monitoring as people want to add, but I would say a very large percentage of our audience is actually over on Facebook, so I want to go ahead and start for them as well. Kind of close to time. So welcome everyone. I'm Jonathan Johnson. For those who don't know me, I think everybody here on Zoom knows me, but if anybody checking in on Facebook, I'm Jonathan Johnson. I teach in the Inland Northwest Center for Writers, the MFA program at Eastern Washington University. And I have the honor tonight of introducing Eman Hassan. Eman Hassan's debut collection of poems, Raghead, received a Folsom Award and was the editor's pick in the 2018 New Issues Poetry Prize. By the way, just as an aside, that the editor at New Issues is my brilliant former teacher, Nancy Eimers, I discovered. And that doesn't surprise me at all, given Eman's aesthetic, her love of the painterly, poetics of conscience, and the emotionally articulate and sincere. So as a witness poet, Eman Hassan earned a PhD in poetry from the University of Nebraska and an MFA in poetry from Arizona State, where she worked as the international poetry editor for Hayden's Ferry Review. She has translated poems for Illinois Review and Aldous, a journal of translation, and presented on multiple panels, including at the Associated Writings Program and LANG SA. Her work has appeared widely in literary journals. In The Art of the Possible, Adrienne Rich, one of America's most compelling poetic voices against oppression, writes, "There are two kinds of forces that bridge spaces of difference. One is solidarity, the recognition that we need to join with others, unlike ourselves, to undo conditions and policies we find mutually intolerable, perhaps for different reasons. This is something more powerful and equalizing than sympathy. The other force is the involuntary emotional connection felt with other human beings in some unforeseen moment that can move us out from old automatic affiliations and loyalties into a new and difficult comradeship. Eman Hassan is a poet of both of these kinds of forces to bridge distances. She calls us to solidarity as she makes present and vivid, difficult and beautiful human realities far from where we are in geography and now in time. And her poems have the force, I can attest myself, of compelling involuntary emotional connection. I discovered Eman and her poetry at AWP in Portland. And as most of you know, there is no more competitive arena for our literary attentions. I found myself attending a panel reading in which she read. The poems she read were not from her first book, which has me already looking forward to her second, presuming that those poems will be in the second. They were poems of familial adoration, so powerful, I wept. The loss of Adrienne Rich a few years back was a blow for me. She had been very important in my development as a writer and human being, and I was fortunate enough to call her a correspondent and champion. But the world turns. The world brings us new poetic teachers. I knew immediately upon hearing her work that day in Portland, a baton had been passed in my literary world. I knew I had found such a teacher for life in Eman Hassan. Please help me welcome her.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was beautiful. It's such a pleasure to be here tonight. I'm really honored to be a visiting writer at Eastern Washington University, and I've spent a wonderful afternoon working with some of your students. And thank you for having me. And I'm honored to share my work with you. Raghead is my first collection, and I've completed a second collection, but not yet published, called Toxic. But I hope to read a couple poems from that collection tonight as well. I think I'll read directly from the manuscript. I think the tactile pleasure of paper and between your fingers is such a rare pleasure, I think, nowadays, that I'm going to indulge in it. I'm going to start with the poem from the book called Rome is Burning. And in rereading it recently, it made me think of how to the art of poetry, there is an element of prophecy, because I'm, reading lines about keeping safe distances from each other in this poem and about fires. And I'm like, oh gosh, I wish I didn't see that one. Well, I jest, but well, you can be the judge of that yourself. Rome is burning. I can't blame Nero for playing the fiddle while watching his city fireball. Sure, there was blood on his hands, turned powerless now except for churning out tunes like a devil dancing on a hot-oiled griddle. It's not like everyone can hear the frantic chirps of crickets. We crank up our music at safe distances from one another, take refuge in front of a Blu-ray mesmer. I mean, isn't this the stigmata of what we do? All hail to purchase power, to lifelines of credit. All hail to the power of fire. So play, Nero, play that fiddle. Let's break out some boom chicka pop and watch the world go poof. And I will continue with the last poem in the collection, but definitely not the last poem in the reading, called Singular Notes. This lamenting is not discordant pianos. It isn't heavy metal elevator music, blocking out daybreak Twitter. My keens like glass shatter beneath trees, dissolve between sonic pulse and static AM/FM frequencies. Fracture and quiet across the World Wide Web, branches scold in wind. My shattered chords seek assemblage against dystopian backdrops, browse sheet music for dummies, manuals, self-paced how-tos. play the guitar in 3 days, dismantle a planet in 4 decades. Do you remember driving under a blue moonrise? We slapped our thighs, sang, remember elevators? Just tell me, where do I click now? What operatic notes to pitch or drop on the ground for us to listen? I can't make up my mind. Are these voices yours or mine? I can't tell. Over and over and over the shriek of a garbage bag in the back car seat. Oh, the static. Oh, the sounds we heard. Do you remember? We slapped our thighs singing, remember birds? All right. My poems do tend to get a little bit heavy. I think I often knit eco-poetic themes with human rights issues. Poetry can be, serves its purpose. Witness poetry, I think we need it in the world now more than ever. I think we were talking earlier about how pandemic poetry is a new genre, I think, unfortunately, under witness poetry. But here we are, still standing, most of us. I think I'll read this poem. I don't usually read this poem. I think it's graphic to some people, but I think I'm gonna read this tonight. It's called War Starts at Home. War starts at home. There's alienation consequent to a bicultural marriage without networks of a racial similar. My father, raghead lover of that goat herder. My mother, that American whore. War started at home. Difference bred disrespect, spawned estrangement from the other. Their offspring cleaved when they fought, shrunk from their words, not those rosy petals falling from their mouths when they broke bread, but withered from thorny spillage of language begetting violence. When younger, you look like your father, only much prettier. Or later, come college, don't muddy my face, don't shame us like your mother. When the war left home, I carried it in my cleavage across the plains of my face, into landscapes of an otherness born of consequent alienation. My visage grew strange in the mirror. It birthed contempt. It looked for roses among violet bruises, each parent gifted to their stupid lover. I was a whore. I was not a whore. And the world is at war. I think a lot of miscommunications have happened in the world recently, and I think part of the human disconnect that we're experiencing just really stems from understanding the other's position, and maybe perhaps that's idealizing it and simplifying it, and to a certain extent it is, but sometimes some of the most complex things are quite simple. All right, I will read. I will read another poem. When I was a teenager, I watched the Gulf War break out in Kuwait. As a bicultural person, I had hippie parents who would often say, "Oh, let's go back to the States and live in Massachusetts." And we'd go there for several years, and then they'd flip the script and say, "Oh, let's go back to Kuwait." So we went back to Kuwait. So we kind of did this on and off as I was a young person. And I was actually there in 1991. I just graduated from high school when the Gulf War broke out. Long story short, I ended up joining the army, being evacuated to DC, and then joining the Red Cross, and then ultimately the army, and joining as an interpreter, and going back to Saudi Arabia to work at an evac hospital as an interpreter. And the colonel there, a very nice man, arranged for a helicopter ride for us to go back to Kuwait about a week after the liberation. And the pilot flew over the burning oil fields for us to see. And that was something that really stayed with me. And this poem came from it. So, suspended. The pilot misunderstood our silence, swooped the helicopter low for a closer look. The desert burning like candlesticks, weeks and weeks of night on end. We washed cars with gasoline to remove soot, covered naked women in deserted police stations after Saddam's soldiers withdrew. Is there another lunatic who says war makes for a better person? They left pelicans oil slicked, killed coral, took truckloads of our men in their wake. I recall that pilot as though trembling before a forgotten lover's ghost, remembering only hovering above slanted columns of billowing smoke, a birthday's endless night. And this one is after my experience in an evac hospital in Saudi Arabia. 251st Evacuation Hospital. The ongoing joke, our lives were like MASH characters, only in deserts instead of jungles. We drew parallels between the hospitals, amusing distinctions over late night MRE repasts, beef stew, reconstituted mashed potatoes, stale slices of white bread, dodgy peanut butter lumps, semblances of cheddar, padding our meals with Doritos, Slim Jims. The familiar grub got us through nights, our days spent scuffling boots down plastic halls of makeshift wards 90 miles from the Kuwaiti border. I felt like an imposter, cast as sergeant interpreter in a serial production, reading helicopters full of wounded POWs, just like the sitcom. Where does it hurt? What is your name? Then came an influx of civilians, along with post-war anti-Ba'athist rebels, alleging they were rallied by airdropped pamphlets, George Bush Sr., promising military support if they rose against Saddam Hussein, AKA Saddam Insane. A backup that never materialized, the pressing PTSD impressed why nots, and how comes I had nobody comebacks for. This one is called Forests Lean Behind Us Now. Before I did make it to the States, when I was a teenager and evacuated with my mother and younger sisters, we were taken off the evacuation plane and held in Iraq for 3 weeks as guests. So it's not really hostages, but not really free to leave. So we were stuck there in limbo for a few weeks, as many bicultural people, about 61 of us were. And slowly we all kind of trickled out, and by the time it was our turn and we got to leave, this is a poem trying to capture the essence of PTSD and the whole act and idea of witnessing, and the whole idea of memory and trauma that plays throughout the collection. So forests lean behind us now. Excuse me. In Massachusetts, we watch the dark, lasered with showers of green, across the TV screen in Great Aunt Marie's gazebo. Kuwaiti skies all backlit with neon smoke of artillery, thinking of family still there under the assault, of our father, the day his qutra gyrated out the window, as my sister hit the gas pedal, leaning out of the car, video cam strapped to his shoulder, the drawing back shot of soldiers taking aim, firing, sear of bullets whizzing over blasts of our father's profanities, over the screech of tires, stench of burnt rubber, and him laughing maniacally in the background of shaky footage as the triangle of white cloth flew off his head, smacked a gunman, ghosting his face, deflecting punctuated rounds. And my sister's hands are shaking now as she strikes a match during the retelling, takes deep drags off her Marlboro red, cloud of white smoke escaping her, almost a shroud of depleted uranium. I will switch to something more uplifting and beautiful for the next poem or two, and then I'll switch back to Raghead. But I would like to read a poem from my completed but not yet published, fingers crossed, second collection. And this poem is called, this poem is called Between Mykonos and Paros. Since we were talking about Greece and having a wonderful discussion earlier on about Greece, I thought we could, this brought this poem to my mind. I wasn't sure if I was going to read it, but it seems like a perfect opportunity to read it. At one point in my life, while I was visiting Greece, long story short, but my friend's younger son badly cut his leg in a motorcycle accident. So we managed to find a ferry ride back from the island of Paros to Mykonos. And it was at night, and it was one of the most beautiful naturistic experiences I've ever had in my life. And this poem came from it. And I wrote it for my husband, who was not my husband at the time, Patrick Gabbard. Between Mykonos and Paros. If you can see the way constellations tilt, the sky's planetarium askew, the Big Dipper promising to spill its luminous broth on your lap when the boat is out in the middle of the sea, far from artificial glint, save what is offered by the night, you would, in your preambles, pause at the design of this map, the way dots of lights braid ropes of sailor knots. You would, lying on your back, sink into the aquamarine sway below your frail craft. Reach your hands towards them as if to pluck one off its twine, and in the span of your palms, taste its succulence, the ice of its spangle. You would fall up into milky spirals draped across watery corridors. Ease the tension in your lips, loosen the strain in your joints, the knotted sinews of your thighs, then give up and be struck, as any tongue-tied novice writer would be. In their utterances before a natural eloquence, no pulse of words can net. You will remember me then as Mnemosyne, and in my remembrance, let wind knots guide you. Let them navigate the hands of your compass between landmass and rocky language. You will recall the sea of verse as stars before you spread out before you are spread. Fill your eyes deep and feast. That's one of my favorite poems to date. The next poem is called Perfectly Clear. Excuse me, I think I'll take a quick sip of water first. Perfectly clear. From up here, the mountains are hills that seem so big to ants below. The rivers make out as veins that snake around those earthen mounds, like water running itself clean. They remind me of my mother sitting next to me, who once loomed so big, now a foothill, her words flowing nonstop, encircling the slopes of her body, though now she is standing still, as though the stream of her speech embodies a longing she will hear. If she stops talking long enough, she will hear the only thing she has not spoken, waiting around the bend of her words, an echo of a former question, only an echo of the original. It is perfectly clear my mother is afraid of the end of every sentence. You can see it deep in the unwinding water of her eyes. You can hear it in her speech, running rapid, incessant, as if each question were an imposture posing for another. All of them secretly, only one, innocently born in the longing mouth of a child, long ago on an airplane, who asked, "Are we there yet?" Speaking of my mother, This poem of mine is a metaphor for killing our mother, but which is to some, well, to me, I can't speak for everyone, but I think we need to really, I think most of us have seen that we really need to reassess our relationship with the planet, and to maintain our ecosystem. And I'll leave it at that and read the poem. Slow matricide. My mother keeps pouring gasoline on her head, keeps dousing her newly shaven scalp with a stuff, wraps rags around her nicked baldness to keep the fumes in, tries to kill what she believes are subcutaneous lice infesting her follicles. No doubt she believes they are real when she blows out matches, presses charred sticks to the raised surfaces of her skull, performs her own ritual of controlled burning, after running a big razor across her crown, sweeps crisp bits of scab onto the coffee table. How many times we've cajoled her to get help, stop this ongoing fracking of her scalp. But mother ignores us, poo-poos the doctor's diagnosis, holds up a magnifying glass, scrutinizes the detritus before her, jowls set beneath a fiery beet red pomegranate head, insists she sees corpses in her own Rorschach evident test. Driving from Flagstaff, I'm detoured by devouring forest fires and think, what if we're all wrong? What if our mother is the only one who got it right, despite her suicidal death drive fight? Acrid smoke fills the air, and all I can see are orange flames, the crash of timber, resonating omens. I'll read another eco-poetic poem. But just to give you some history, I think most poets know from an early age they're poets, but for me, my parents really persuaded me to have a healthy, solid money-making career, which I did for a good period of my life. I became a corporate girl after my undergrad years. Thought about my future and making a building a life and saving money and all that good stuff. However, I think our true nature, especially as we get older in our 30s, kind of emerges, and had I think an early midlife crisis, and I left the corporate world and the petrochemical company that was my second to last job before I decided to go back to school and study poetry, and do a career change. So this poem is based at a petrochemical plant. My experiences there, and it's called What We Made, and it's based in Kuwait, the year 2000. What we made. Tiny pellets in glass jars on the CFO's desk, and the desk of the warehouse manager, who proudly once asked my green-eared newbiness if I knew how important our job was. If I knew what we made, supplied raw material for grocery bags, Tupperware, milk containers, lighters, you name it. Plastic is in everything, he'd say, and he was right. There I learned various petrochemical densities, polypropylene, polyethylene, and other byproducts emitted like ammonia, and the imminent dangers sometimes the released ammonia clouds posed. We were committed to stay indoors until those vapors passed. But who can say for sure where they passed on to? An older British man there took great pleasure in pinching the backs of my hands, teaching me about elastin, how the body's fibroblasts produced less and less as we age, how he enjoyed my 20-something's horror at the prospect of losing collagen. I am not proud of who I was then, nor proud of my former manager who laughed when I could no longer live with myself and quit. She thought me a loser, and she was right. Except, aren't we all losers in these long-term climatic stakes? Sometimes I think of those former coworkers, wonder if, when settling before a lunch of grilled fish, they ever thought, in addition to the cost of price per barrel, of what the long-term costs of what we made were. If they had seen pictures of the seagulls' gullet, desiccated gullets splayed open, cavities filled with a tensile stuff. If they connected the dots between plastic pellets and the bellies of fish warming their own stomachs. Fruits de mer of our own making. I will read, since I read my mother-themed poems, I'll read a poem that I wrote for my father, and it's the title poem of the collection called Raghead. Sorry, I'm at the wrong poem. I like this poem because it really shows a human side to the Arabic Gulf male figure of the, the white Dishtasha and the Qatra and the, the hardcore religious intolerance that I think that's often portrayed in the media. And yes, my father was a very religious, not when he was younger, but when he was older, became a very religious man. But he also had a lot of human understanding and a lot of fluidity to his personality, and we had a lot of fun when I was growing up. So this poem is for my father, and it's called Raghead. It was more of penis envy, more than ancestral calling of desert warriors who understood the power those filmy layers had to survive the sun's overwhelming, but oh man, the tactile allure of phyllo fabric between fingers still thrills me. Castration complex, straight up sexual attraction, no matter. But I used to don my father's headgear, preen in his bedroom mirror. How handsome. My pulse pounding in Bedouin drumbeat fashion, afraid to wrinkle its starched goodness or be found in its gauzy tabernacle, admiring how white material flanked my profile like holy sideburns, stiff wings halo-like, delicate when left hanging. I was outrageous in my faux drag, feeling like a deckhand struggling to master the art of a sail flip over a shoulder. Just a curious teenager, bored over summer break, desirous of my first Dishtasha experience, lip syncing Boy George, karma, 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 chameleon, or pretending I was a nun in habit, wagging a finger at my reflection in bouts of Midsummer Night's imagining, get thee to a nunnery. No matter my precaution, my father finally caught a show of my shenanigans, zeal of his pleasure at my make-believe surreal, as he taught me to fold the cloth, tease its front into a dent under an anchoring rope of gahfiya. He dressed me up in a dishtasha, and we went for a ride. He let me drive the whole stretch of Gulf Road, agreeing my name for the night was Ibrahim al-Majnoon. And crazy we were, with my eyelinered unibrow, penciled mustache, and him still loud and lively, pretending I was the son he didn't have. Oh, Qutra, to me, you're everything but a rag. And one of the things I like about that poem is that it hints of non-binary sexuality that I think Kuwait as a society is still very young and still struggles with. I've known a lot of people who have suffered because of their gender representation or their sexual preferences, and there's even a law right now in Kuwait that says it's illegal to be anything but heterosexual. So I think what's coming out now in the art scene in Kuwait is a lot of younger artists coming out, and in ways that they can. So I think this poem of mine kind of hints at the fluidity of gender performance that I do hope queer artists will really run with. One of the areas, I think the Middle East in general, not just Kuwait, has a lot of growth to do, is about human trafficking. I think slavery really never left the world. It's only changed form. And I call the human trafficking, the contracting of migrant laborers there, just neo-slavery, and it's very sad. And slowly awareness grows, and it's starting to grow there in the Gulf countries. I wrote this poem to try to capture some of the surrealness of my American ethos being in a different part of the world, and being witness to what I would consider human atrocities, and how we treat others. So without further ado, this poem is called Transport. Traffic on the road is terrible, but here, this is normal. This can be anywhere in the Middle East. The heat is stampede through the solar plexus. I see those men as I get in a cab, sink into cool air. How those men stare, and I let them. I can see, not through, but at. I look on, too, and it startles their Asian faces enough to momentarily forget how they sit, squashed, bent over in small seats, shackled by space, shoulders numb against sides of the metal truck. You know, the kind used to move livestock. Trafficking on the road is terrible, but here this is normal. This can be anywhere in the Middle East. Eyes peek out of parallel slats as if peering from an oven. I wrote this poem shortly after relocating back to the United States in 2006. And I have to say, as a human being, my own thinking and my own trajectory of evolution makes me want to say that even animals should not be transported in such a way. And I think globally, we're starting to reevaluate our relationship to animals as well, other sentient beings in the world. I'll leave it at that and try to find a more uplifting poem or two to end the reading on. I'd like to read this in the honor of Jonathan Johnson, who I know likes this poem. It's called The Blossoming. It's not a cheerful poem, but it's caught my eye. The Blossoming. She closes her eyes and sees the beloved flowers of her garden she will never look upon again. The lilacs, jasmine, and iris, suddenly revealed after enduring winter. She sees women, some of them walking miles to come and touch her, as if her bravery might lend their metal its glint, steel their cores, a promise they can feel in a place where affection's petals are more scarce than poppies for opiates. When she closes her eyes, she recalls rosebud girls threatening to burn their faces, begging her to end the cleaving to old men, and mothers with wringing hands, afraid for them. She takes it in, absorbs their grief into her garden depth zen, and while promising, smiles. When she closes her eyes, she sees the men lining the halls of the parliament, shouting, "Rape her, kill her." Warlords bent on having her head, their glares edgy as swords, swooping through her garden the night she fled, as if, in shedding the burqa, she unveils them, lays bare the blade of their lens, unlocks the violent selves that, in seeing the self reflected for the first time, try to smash her instead. All those years, while controlling the very breath, the cloth did not penetrate her mind. She does not cower, stands tall on the stalk of her intent, under the heat of their bloodlust gaze, stemming from a flowering they deeply deny, as if her free face were a vagina she flaunts, asking for it every time she closes her eyes. And I wrote that for Malalai Joya, a former Afghani parliament member who had to, basically pack her bags and run out of fear of her life from Afghanistan. She was the first woman to basically publicly stand up and remove the burqa and say, I'm a free autonomous human being, and I'm not going to live my life on these terms. Well, since the 50s, where Afghanistan took this radical political change. And I happened to meet her at the Human Rights Film Watch Festival in New York in the summer of 2007. And she was there giving a lecture with a reading. And I was so moved by her that this poem came from that meeting. Well, I think I will end this reading on a short poem called "To the Girl Who Flipped My Jeep." It's a true story. It was actually my mother's Jeep. I was driving her car and got driven off the road by a couple of young girls, and that tragic story. I won't go into it, but I'm fine, still walking, still standing. But I think this was a challenge. I felt I had to really tell a narrative of something just through layering images together and playing with diction. To the girl who flipped my Jeep. It's not fireflies, I tell you. Not blinking lights on graveled roads filled with thorny briars. No valley of dinosaur eggs. Your jeweled pirate's chest pricks my ribs. Secretly tucked neuropathic highway signals fray vertebra into discs. Listen, the body is barbed wire and dandelion, synapse and tendon, driftwood composite. Your delicate architecture, my red handkerchief of bones. Thank you. If anybody has any questions, or I should leave that for Jonathan, shouldn't I?
Well, can I start it out? Well, people, because I've got two. Will other people think of theirs? One is a simple fact question. What is the name of that exquisite fairy poem, the Greek fairy poem?
Oh, between Mykonos and Paros. It's two islands in the Cyclades. I'll type the name right now in the chat as well.
Is it published anywhere yet?
Yes, it was published in the Greek. It was called a Greek Poems in a journal called Illustration, I believe, by Madison, Wisconsin University, back in 2011. It was in print. I'm not sure if it's online, but it's been published. Yes. Excuse me.
Absolutely exquisite poem. So then my other question was, can you talk about what writing does for your relationship with difficult experience, whether it's your own difficult experience or pain that you're aware of? What does writing about it do to the relationship? And maybe just to contextualize it a little bit, I've thought about this a lot in my own life. And in my experience, one has these encounters in the world, or one has these experiences in the world, and they're bigger than you. I mean, you're kind of like this, right? You're here, and the thing that's done to you, or the thing that happens to you, or the thing that you're aware of that was done to someone else is this tall. And somehow with time and writing, it's almost you achieve a kind of equalization with the experience. Not that the experience is less significant, but that by being able to manipulate it and put it into language and gain a certain amount of control over how the experience is then made into art. That's the best I've done so far to think about why I write about pain and grief. And I'm wondering if you can tell us about your experience. What does writing do for the relationship to your experiences?
I'd love to. I think this is a subject that's really dear to my heart, and I well, let me backtrack really quickly and tell you about one technique that a lot of therapists use. For instance, Kelly Oliver, the philosopher, writes about it, and so does Laurie Daub, a psychoanalyst, and they talked about how World War II, post Auschwitz, prisoners of war were able to heal and move forward from their experiences was by actually talking about it. And there's this whole discourse in how, subjectivity can be ravaged by trauma and displaced by trauma, and how the act of retelling and the act of writing is incredibly cathartic. And I wouldn't say cathartic, no, I retract that word. It's incredibly subjective, healing for the subject or the person. And it helps you kind of come to terms with the experience and kind of like take it out of you, and yet put it in front of you to examine and heal from, and to kind of use it as an opportunity for growth and share it with the world. And I think doing that is an act of healing the world, not just yourself, but when you heal yourself, you help heal the world. And when you write about it and you share it with others, I think you gain like a recognition of the issue, and it kind of helps make it real and not just inside of you, if that makes any sense. And it kind of and it helps you make lemonade from lemons, if you will. I'm saying that cliche, but I quite don't like it. But it's there, you have it. It's taking your pain and making art of it. And I think many poets do that. Many writers do that. It's the impetus for a lot of great pieces I've read. And for me, I mean, I write a lot of cheerful stuff too. Well, not a lot often, but I'm contradicting myself. But no, I think writing about things I want to fix and heal in the world are also things I want to fix and heal in myself. And I think writing about it helps heal the trauma of the experience.
That's a great answer. Yeah, it's one of the reasons that your work recalled Adrienne Rich for me so much, because for her, I mean, of course, she was the one who famously taught us all, or reminded us all, of a fundamental truth, that the personal is political, that there isn't, these things are not distinguishable, right? The pain that happens to us as individuals, as well as the triumphs that we achieve as individuals, those are the pains and triumphs of the world, right? And the thing that struck me about your work when I was standing there in the back of the room in Portland, and you read, the blossoming, and I was just so moved, was how much there's this sense that we are a fiber, right? That we are all a fiber, and that there was the power shifts, that shift of power where, the things that we're subjected to in the world have all this tremendous power over us, and that there's this, through creativity, through writing, there's this sort of return of our power. And I think about Elie Wiesel too, and writing. I mean, I remember my daughter was she was a first year in high school when she read Night, and I was horrified. I thought, no, please, my 14-year-old daughter, please do not put that in her head. And now she's at Georgetown, actually, where Carolyn Forché is, studying to be a diplomat, and we're doing research on female refugees and how the laws should recognize unique things that happen to women who are refugees that aren't recognized in the laws. So many of the laws are gender neutral, and how that doesn't treat women's experiences. And so, something like Elie Wiesel for a 14-year-old gives back power to the world. And I think that's what your work does as well.
Thank you, Jonathan. I really appreciate that. Giving back power. I love that. That's exactly what it is. Exactly what it is.
I would hog Eman all night, but I'll surrender my time for other questions.
Hi. Thanks for that reading. There was one of your eco poems that had such amazing images in it, and I was trying to remember. It was the lit the match and then the ember burned the scalp, but there was this phrase that you had about fracking the scalp or something like that. What was that phrase?
Stop the ongoing fracking of her scalp.
That poem was amazing. That just really captured me. I remembered it since you read it, and I need to see it again, so I have to look up that collection.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Oren.
Hi. So this is something of a question that ties in with Dr. Johnson's. When you write about your past experience, whether it be, well, I suppose specifically for things that are, for lack of a better word, I suppose traumatic, or things that have affected you greatly, do you find that you gravitate more toward being very literal and straightforward in your depiction of the events in your poetry, or do you find that you can use like metaphor and kind of surrealism to achieve the same kind of healing that you're searching for? What method do you tend to go toward, and how do you make that choice?
That's a wonderful question. A wonderful question, because sometimes, as you know, as a writer, you grapple with the layers of the writing process and the whole revision process, and sometimes it's the poem itself that drives that answer. Sometimes I think to a certain extent, as human beings, we tend to hide behind imagery sometimes when we cannot maybe say it ourselves directly. So we might hide behind a metaphor or an image, but as a poet, it's a gift when an image comes to you or a metaphor comes to you, and so I think it comes from that other part of yourself, that poetic voice of being a maker and creator of poems. However, one of the telltale marks of witnessing or witness poetry inevitably is direct, plain, simple, direct speech, and traumatized staccato-like speech as well. And Eric, I think Carolyn Forche really outlines that well. I mean, in her introduction to Against Forgetting, the anthropology, her first anthropology of witness poetry. So I think, to answer your question, it's a combination. You can't help but give a direct rendering of the experience at times, and sometimes that direct rendering, that experience can't help but hide behind an image or a metaphor. And sometimes, as a poet, I will come in and say, how can I tweak this scenario? How can I say this with just an image, because it's going to be much more powerful than me talking about it. So it's a combination, really. I can't just choose one.
Well, thank you. That's wonderful.
You're welcome.
I just have a question just about your writing process. I wonder, you were mentioning how sometimes words come to you, just a few come to you, and then you just let them kind of turn into the next thing and write them down. But I just would love to hear how you make poems, when you choose to write, and what steps lead you to the next steps. If that makes sense. It's a very broad question, but I just wanted to hear more.
Oh, no, it makes perfect sense. And I think I think if we ever, as writers, just sit down and have a poem come through or from ourselves onto the page or the keyboard, I think it's such a rare treat that happens. But my personal writing process, and I don't mean to intentionally sound vague and answering you, Heather, or like I did with Oran, but it's a combination of things. Sometimes you get an idea, or a poem can come just from an image, or it just can come from a moment. It can come from witnessing something outside yourself that's greater than yourself, that commands you to address it. I think poets get that a lot. I used to write more so in the past in different genres than I do now, but I think the act of writing is like that. It speaks to you from multiple pathways and multiple directions. My process is, I would say, definitely one of revision and being slightly obsessed with the poem at hand. The best advice I can give, and I should take my own advice sometimes, is to try to give all your attention to one poem at a time. And sometimes, when the spirit seizes you, you move with it. I once sat pretty much 2 days in a row with a long poem, and I couldn't do anything. I could hardly sleep. I could hardly eat. I just sat and obsessed with that poem. But that's what that poem commanded. And I've had other poems I just love that just, came from a very simple, stark image. So I hope that answers your question, Heather. It's maybe not the answer you wanted, but it's a multiple approach.
No, it's great. That's exactly what I was hoping for.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just going to question number 2 from Heather. Just when you think about form, when you think about how you choose to write the poems that come to you, I just see a lot of variety in your form, and I'm wondering how you make those choices. Is it an intuitive thing? What feels right with the content of the poem? Yeah, I'd love to hear about that too.
Yeah, I will. This is a very direct answer, and it's funny that you ask this. Well, because this is something in the conversation with myself that I was having last night. My ultimate final answer on the topic is the content drives the form. I think you can sit down and say, I'm going to write a sonnet. And it's just not going to be a sonnet because the content doesn't want to be that the spirit of the poem, the impetus, it just doesn't want to be a sonnet. And you kind of have to, accept it. If, you have to reconcile, do you want the poem or do you want the form? And sometimes you want to write a, free verse and it's actually a sonnet. So, I mean, I sit back sometimes and giggle as I write and just allow myself that fluidity and to say, okay, this is not going to be, a sestina. This is going to be, a prose poem, so give yourself that, unless you're in a forms class and have a deadline. But no, I think ultimately let the content drive the form.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Oh, okay. You saw me click that, huh? Thanks, Oren. I just have a question about your life experience, being in Kuwait during the first Gulf War. I can't remember how old you said you were at, the early 90s one where we actually, bombed the oil fields and all that stuff, or they were burning. When that happened, my daughter was little, and we were all glued to the television set here in the States, and they had, it was like they scripted a movie on TV. We didn't really see what was really going on. We saw just what they wanted us to see. When you were outside of the United States, were you having a totally different experience than we had here?
I would say yes, because I was on the ground and I didn't have access to, TV, phone lines, phone lines were only internal at that point. There was only one Ba'athist party regulated TV channel that came up, like everything was cut down in the beginning, and then that came later. They kind of like would monitor and regulate this one channel, and I think one or two radio channels. But if you were lucky, you had a good radio and you can get BBC News and all that. But yeah, but you're not wrong. I think Baudrillard, Jean Baudrillard, the French theorist, he wrote a book called The Gulf War Did Not Happen. And he talked about this whole phenomenon, like the rise of media with the rise of cinematic scripted news, and the whole idea of, the clean, immaculate war that didn't have a lot of like, face-to-face combat, but like from the air strategic strikes and all that. So in a way, it maybe was scripted, the footage for the viewer, maybe the whole, help of the American military was strategically compiled. But I would say for me, like my experiences while I was in Kuwait, and the 3 weeks, sorry, not years, that I was stuck in Iraq, I had pretty much no access to any media at all. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I was thinking because we called the poetry of witness, and when you're on the ground, like when Carolyn Porcher wrote her memoir, and she's on the ground and she's witnessing stuff that maybe a lot of us wouldn't even be able to handle if we witnessed it, And then, but what we get, the filtered story of the news, we don't know about all the imperialism that happened in Central and South America and all that, because we don't get taught that in school. It's all filtered. And that's the poetry of witness that you're talking about, and that you do, and that she has done. It's so important because it's still hidden. There's still a lot of people who don't know what's the truth is about what's going on. And I don't know if it's just the poet's responsibility. Now, I know Tony Hoagland wrote an essay before he died about that. I don't know if you saw that essay that he wrote. It was in the Writer's Chronicle about poets have to just speak up and say what they see and all that kind of stuff. And I just think that's just so important. And I really applaud you for following that genre.
Thank you, Carrie. I appreciate that. And I think there's so much truth to what you said. I think all poets at one point or another, whether they're witnessing their own lives or witnessing the life around them in the world, I think more and more poets are, I think you can call it, in many ways, you can call poetry, all poetry, a manifesto or an act of witnessing. Thank you.
I see Sarah has her hand up.
I didn't want to cut anybody off, but I was reading this again recently. I got to read it last year, your collection. And something I noticed this time around, and I did notice it last time, but didn't think about it too heavily, was you have these moments, especially in your darker poems, the ones that are really heavy, these moments of very colloquial language or references that really interrupt kind of the tone very, very suddenly and in a jarring way. And I think of one I think halfway through the book, there's a line break and you say, if you came looking for a sonnet, this isn't one, right? And then you go right back into your poem. And I was just wondering, well, first of all, I haven't gotten to that point where I think I feel comfortable enough to do something like that. But I was wondering is it a part of your drafting process? Is it something you do in revision? And just kind of, why do you feel that break? Where do you feel that break come? I don't know. I guess I'm just so curious about it.
Let me just say that if you haven't come to that point yet in your own writing, you will. And also the tension that you create between high diction, low diction, or between interruptions of your own verse is a trigger for not just yourself as you write, but it's a trigger for the reader. And I remember drafting that poem, and I remember that specific maneuver was a moment where I was, as I was writing, telling myself, God, you only write about sad things lately. And why can't you write a sonnet? And so that's actually where that line came from. I'm like, oh my gosh, if you're looking for a sonnet, this isn't it. So I think in a way I was talking to myself. And I'm like, yeah, that actually works. I'm going to keep that. So that was the bare bone nuts and bolts process for that poem. But always remember, like when you utilize uh, contrasting tensions and between language or imagery, that just does something wonderful for a poem.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's an extraordinarily useful craft, like applicable thing. I know we're all kind of eager, thinking, oh, we're going to go right now and like do that and have that kind of companionable to ourselves moment at the desk. I'm going to give Oran the final question.
Now I automatically feel bad. Okay. But I was actually curious about poetic influences, and if you have any recommendations for younger, newer poets that you've been reading that you've been awed by.
Oh, that's a really big question, Oran. Recommended reading list. When I would definitely go for a big one, the anthology that was just edited by Joy Harjo. When the songs of the world were when the light of the world was subdued, our song came through. I think that is one of the most. I hate to use the word wonderful because it's such a simple, but it's just wonderful. I mean, it's such a big project that she took on, and she covered basically the poetry of the Dene area by area through a chronological timeline, while saying time isn't really important in these poems at all, and it gives us such a wonderful peek into different types of poetics, translations, or just different phases in Native American or Dene poetics. And I was so awestruck when I read it this summer, last summer, I guess now. Time, that slippery thing, right? So I would definitely recommend that. Carrie was talking about Carolyn Forche. I would definitely read her In the Lateness of the World. Carolyn Forche has a gift of maintaining a universality. Excuse me. She keeps her work universal, and because of that, it's so appealing to everybody. I mean, I don't think anybody ever feels othered or alienated in her poems, even if she's talking, crap about you, you're like, oh yeah, I can relate to that. That is totally me. So she has this kind of direct finesse that's specific yet universal. So I would definitely read her poetry. She's a great poet. I would definitely read. Gosh, there are so many. Gosh, I'm drawing a blank. There's just so many wonderful poets in the world that are just coming up with wonderful books. I would definitely read Claudia Rankine. I'm a big fan of all her works. Don't Let Me Be Lonely. I think that was her debut collection, and gosh, and I have her latest book. I'm looking at my bookshelf. I think it's called Just Us. I've not read it yet, but I have it. I've heard rave reviews about it. I heard Deaf Republic was a wonderful collection. So I mean, I could go on and on about all the wonderful collections out there. But here's a tip. I kind of join different Facebook groups or different listservs and everything, and I always get these wonderful notifications of all these new books and stuff. And I read book reviews as well, and I'm like, oh, I read this one. I cannot pronounce his last name. Adam. I'm not even going to try, but he wrote a book called Mary Oliver, after the poet Mary Oliver, who writes such nice poems, but his collection is very dark, and it's about drug addiction and his battle with with narcotics, but he really wrote a brilliant collection called Mary Oliver, and it's really nothing to do with Mary Oliver, but his own personal life experience. Can't remember his last name or pronounce his last name rather, but you all. I'm not even going to try, but I hope that helps.
Eman, will you do us a favor, because you've got really very much a fan base here. Oh, there, Will put it in. Thank you, Will. Tedesco, Tedesco.
I'm really glad you did that, Will, because I was confusing him with Adam Zagajewski. I'm going to go ahead and try to say his name, and I'm like, I can't remember the last name, so it's like, am I remembering it or not pronouncing it? So it's Adam Tedesco. Thank you so much.
So you've got quite a following here. Would you do us the honor of keeping us informed, especially as long as they're going to be Zoom, of future appearances, or anytime you're teaching workshops or festivals or stuff? Because I know I speak for a whole lot of us here, and I'm teaching your book again here in about a month and a half in my graduate workshop, and I know we'd love to continue to check in on you. And please let us know when that second book, because there's no doubt in my mind that it's a matter of when that second book comes out, because we'd love to have you back.
Jonathan, you're really kind. I'm really grateful to be here tonight and to be with you all. Thank you so much, and thank you for enjoying my work. It means a lot.
Thanks, Eman.
Peace,
Be
everyone.
well. Good night, all.
Bye.